questions afterwards, then you can also just put them into the chat and we'll try to answer them. And yeah, this is obviously streamed on YouTube, but we will also record this and then it will also be shared on our Later Life audio and radio network, so that you can also re-listen at a later point if you want to. Thank you. So we're being recorded. So another reason why, yeah, if you have a question later, just put it in the chat. And yeah, so welcome to the Aging and HCI Summer Panel for the festival. And I'm Arlind. I'm a PhD student at Open Lab on the Digital Civics CDT, and my research interest is around aging and technology, in particular with a focus on media and civic participation. And I think we just wanted to host this session because we've really seen a change in terms of how HCI research addresses aging, going from a very biomedical point of view more towards community-based research, co-designing with older people, and acknowledging diversity in later life. And this is also part of what we want to draw on in today's session. So a bit talking about alternative ways in which HCI researchers can address aging and work together with older adults. And we also want to highlight some issues that we see at the moment. So really putting an activist angle on it, a civic angle, and talk about our participatory action research with the civic and with the political impact as well. And yeah, you can see I've invited two older activists and research collaborators to the panel today. And first, I want to introduce Anne Raffel. So if we could have a spotlight on Anne. And we have the spotlight. Well, this is Barbara. Okay, we can also start the introduction with Barbara. Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
So Barbara Douglas is an older persons activist from the Elders Council of Newcastle, and she's been an ongoing collaborator with Open Lab. And Barbara has been a central figure in setting up the age-friendly city in Newcastle and really establishing the Older People's Forum. And yeah, together we've worked on quite a few little projects around media for engagement and capturing older people's voices in public spaces. And second, now maybe we can have Anne. Hi, Anne. So Anne Raffle is the chair of the Elders Council of Newcastle, and she's also collaborated with me on various research, and we've worked together in particular around marketing of the Elders Council, redesigning parts of their communications towards a more collaborative way of working, for example, with their media output. And yes, third, we have Mervyn Eastman. Can we have the spotlight on Mervyn? I'm going to start talking anyway. So Mervyn has over 40 years experience in social care, working within the public and third sector, and he's authored a number of books. And following his early retirement as a director of social services, he was appointed director of the government Quango out of the Cabinet Office, and he co-founded Change Agents, which is an older person's cooperative collective. And in addition, he also hosts a weekly radio show, which is called Age Speaks on East London Radio. I can see you now as well. That's good. And last, we have Gerry Foley. Hi, Gerry.
Hi.
And Gerry has been a broadcast journalist for more than 35 years, working as a political correspondent and editor at Westminster for various ITV companies. And he's traveled with and interviewed every Prime Minister from the late Baroness Thatcher to David Cameron. And he's also a regular commentator on politics on Irish radio. And what we all have in common today is that all our panelists today are members of the Later Life Audio and Radio Cooperative, which we will also introduce today because I think it's an initiative that we created to showcase older adults' contributions in radio and broadcasting, and it really emphasizes that civic angle. So I want to start, but I need to get back to my overview first. Okay. So the first question I thought that we could start with today is directed to Anne and Barbara. And because you've been Open Lab research collaborators for a long time, working on various projects, even before I joined Open Lab, there's been a lot of collaboration. And at the beginning, I remember when we talked maybe 4 years ago, we were thinking a lot about the issues of digitalization, and being mindful of including on and offline members of the Elders Council, and the importance of having a digital profile as an older people's organization. So I just really want to talk a little bit about why this was important to you and what did you achieve so far? Where would you like to go with this whole like digital timeline of the Elders Council?
Mm-hmm. Can I ask Barbara to start with that one, because I wasn't actually involved 4 years ago.
Okay, so yes, Arlind's quite right. We've had quite a lot of engagement with Open Lab, mainly helping us with, you know, new, different ways of engaging people, because that's obviously the core business of the Elders Council, is to engage as many people as we can in as many different ways. But I think once we started to work, particularly with you, Arlind, and particularly because of the work that you had done with the Elders Council's radio show, Older Voices, I think what it started to open up for us was actually the fact that we really needed to up our game, if you like, in terms of the digital profile of the organization, because to a large extent, we were still quite paper-based and also based around face-to-face contact. And we really needed to do much more in the digital space to engage more people and to engage people who were in a, if for want of a better word, in a slightly younger age group. I'm still talking about people aged over 50, but actually a lot of our members kind of been in their 80s and 90s even. So it was about moving with the times, if you like. And so I think we started a bit, we obviously had a website, but then we started a bit gingerly with Facebook, and then moved on to an online bulletin, which has been a fantastic tool for us. And we did that in quite a basic fashion at first, and then we learned how to use MailChimp and get it onto MailChimp, which has been much better for us. And you know, gradually doing more and more, and I suppose also in the situation we're in now, we've all learned pretty quickly how to get ourselves onto Zoom and, you know, interact in that way. And we're even moving on to kind of hosting our own webinars. So, you know, we've really pushed ourselves and learned a huge amount in order to raise the profile of the organization and, you know, get more diverse engagement.
Thank you, Barbara. And Anne, do you want to talk a little bit maybe about what we've done in particular with the MailChimp? Because I think that's quite a nice example of moving or using technology for a more collaborative way of working, and maybe how that also changed some of the workflows in which you were producing the e-bulletin.
Certainly, Arlind, and with your help to do this, because obviously we were aware of MailChimp, you know, we all receive MailChimp notifications from time to time. So we knew what it could do, but, you know, I think like anybody, when they're facing something for the first time, it's a case of how will I do this, you know, how will I manage that, and my understanding of it. So from a personal point of view, I have to say that the skills that you helped us to attain have been invaluable to us, to the organisation, but also it improved and increased our confidence in what we were doing, and how we challenged ourselves to meet different needs and disciplines. So, you know, it's been absolutely invaluable. We did work very collaboratively with you, because we did have ideas about what we would like to see it look like. It was important to make sure that anything that we are marketing has a profile that reflects ourselves, and so that people recognise that. And what we have been able to do is to make sure that that has continued through Facebook, and we're now on Twitter, and all of the other areas that we're involved in. So if anybody sees the logo, they will hopefully remember that it is the Elders Council of Newcastle. So it's been an invaluable experience for us, and by talking to you and your colleagues and hearing more about the services and how things are what things are available to us, it has actually encouraged us to look further and find out how far we can go, what we can actually do with these things.
Yeah, and maybe I have to just say at this point that this was a very, as Anne said, a very collaborative way of researching as well, because the actual idea of using MailChimp didn't come from me. I think Mary suggested this, and it actually came from a way where we thought we really want to know who the audience is, but if we send just normal emails out, we don't really track audience statistics. And I think it also shows that through this whole process, we've managed to connect a bit more with the members of the Elders Council as well.
And the wider community.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. So I have another question for Mervyn. Having worked in the public and third sector, what were your experiences around digitalization? Because I think what the Elders Council experienced is probably a quite common experience for older people's organizations. But in particular, I want to ask you, what do you think about these issues around digital inclusion, but mainly digital participation, which really is kind of a more active way of looking at older people and in digital spaces as well, and what you contribute?
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think the first question I would ask, or in response as an answer, is when we talk about digitalization in the context of civic participation, can I just say something about my experience and my journey? And my journey from the public and the third sector is that we are very used to and very comfortable in, if you like, the participation on the participation landscape. And I think that one of my first lessons since becoming involved in understanding what digitalization actually meant was that we see and view participation from a particular lens, even physically, in relation to older people's councils, older people's forums, and so on. And I think for me, my first part of my journey was to think very differently. So the first thing is, how do we define an older adult? Because it's not just the over 50s. The over 50s comprise of a number of generations. I am now, in about 8 days' time, going to celebrate my 71st birthday. So I come as an expert in relation to complete naivety around computers. I can't even cut and paste. So what I do come to is understanding the audiences that comprise of older adults. And the first thing I'd say is we need to be clear about what we're talking about in relation to the demographic, the older adult. Because if you're looking at someone in their 51, taking Barbara's point, to 101, we have to watch using our own experience and our own life course to generalize across those generations. First thing I'd say. The second thing I learned about participation, which I think does include an understanding around digitalization, is that we are needing to think about BAME communities. We need to be thinking about LGBTQ. We need to be thinking also about how we perceive, not just, if you like, technology, but how we perceive civic participation and what it means. So my journey over the last few years having become involved far more outside of face-to-face participation, but rather using, if you like, radio, audio, and so on, is how and to whom and to what end. And so that's been my journey. And I've been very excited about that journey. I started looking at using radio to encourage civic participation, but also to try and get the age industry, whether that's in the public sector, the third sector, or down the street, is to think differently about the use of technology. And most of it's been focused on digital exclusion, how older adults, don't understand computers, so they phone their grandchildren up and they're rescued by their grandchildren. And so I think that for me, it was around how can we use radio as a vehicle for two things. One is to change the narrative around growing older. I want people to think about me not as a 71-year-old or that needs cocooning at this time, but as an older person with a life course who has struggled with technology, but now understands far more about the potential to use radio as a vehicle through which older voices are democratized. I'm going to finish now, Arlind, so that everyone else can have a go. But one last word I would say, and that is it is very, very important to realize that being 71 does not always make me right, because I can be very, very wrong. And being seven doesn't necessarily make me wrong, because I can always be right. Yeah. We come to looking at older people's issues with mindsets that are ageist, stereotyping, let alone when we start to get into the content of radio programs for older people. Does that answer the question, or have I all got you going?
I think that's really the point that we've, as a network, talked a lot about, is that changing of ageist narratives, and in particular in the mainstream media. And I think that's something that as a network, and also privately, Mervyn and with the Elders Council, it's really something that we work towards. And I think who to ask better than Gerry, because Gerry, you have all this experience working in broadcasting as your career. So what do you think about these narratives that we've seen in the media, and in particular around COVID-19? I think was a time where it really we saw so much ageism, and yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very, very true. I'm still slightly recovering from Mervyn admitting that it can be occasionally wrong as well as mainly right. But it's because the whole point, what both Barbara and Anne had to say really struck a chord with me, which is that through their initial engagement with you at the university, and now more recently with Larne itself, this idea we've all got to up our game, and that because of the exceptional circumstances of being in lockdown, technology has come to the help of so many people who before would have felt less than comfortable with it. And I include myself with this because I'd never used Zoom before the lockdown started. And as well as using it for events like this, we now use it very much for keeping in touch with family, but also friends, for fun events, and just as a way of communicating. And Mervyn also was spot on when he talked about the nature of participation, because, you know, in the first, I suppose, 2 or 3 decades working as a news reporter, mainly on the political side, but also more recently on general news, participation is actually a very big decision. Who decides whose voice is heard within an individual package? You know, you've only got 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, maybe if you're lucky. And yes, if you're doing a political package, considerations in terms of political balance and impartiality comes into play. But if you're doing another more general type of package, who do you go to? And I suppose the media over the years has had to learn and evolve itself in terms of reaching out to a more diverse group of participants, hearing other voices. Again, Mervyn mentioned about the LGBT community and minority groups, and also, you know, we've had a big debate in the last few weeks about Black Lives Matter and how issues around race and history are portrayed in the media. I know we're getting away a little bit from COVID, but it comes back to the point, as broadcasters, it was always top down. We were telling you what the news is. What's changed in the last 5 years is that all of us are now much more interested in getting our own stories across. And the way in which the network and the Elders Council which has been in existence for nearly 20 years, it's about the bottom-up approach, about talking to people and say, you've got a point of view, we need to hear and respect what you have to say. And from my point of view, part of what Lauren is trying to do is to give us not only the platform, but also the tools, because all of us have to learn all the time. It was only in my last sort of 7 or 8 years working as a journalist that I had to get on the technical side and learn how to edit the film piece that the cameraman would have shot for me. Before, that would have been done by an editor. So things evolve all the time. But what was so encouraging to hear from Anne and from Barbara was the way in which they feel, even in the space of a few months, they've learned new things. And now, I suppose the next step is how we build on the progress which people have made within their own family circumstances, and then use it as a public platform, because we've been using these tools in many ways as a private way of keeping in touch with family and friends. But now we have to look beyond that. And this is what this whole discussion is really about, I think.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point. And I know in particular that the Elders Council radio team also pushed their entire production online. So did Mervyn, I know that, with Age Speaks. So maybe we can actually pick up on that as well. Anne, I mean, I know you watched it, and I know you were a guest on the Elders Council program, which is called Older Voices. How was that experience for you? And how is this kind of the longevity of that production type going for the Elders Council? Do you know anything about what they're planning?
I'm not directly involved in the planning. Yes, I did last year my very first radio interview. So I'm really relatively new to this myself. And it was useful to do. I wouldn't say it gave me huge amounts of confidence, but it certainly helped to learn more about the process and to help me to develop. I'm still quite nervous about these things, but you know, we do the best that we can.
But Anne, if I could just come across for a second, because that was a point you made in your opening remarks about the confidence to do it. It is a learning process.
Yes.
And, you know, I happen to spend my life, you know, asking questions and being comfortable in front of a microphone or in front of an audience. Most people don't do that. And it is something you have to learn, but you're putting across an important message. And you, as you say, each time you do it, you feel a little bit better about it. And it's not a question about being word perfect. Nobody's word perfect all the time. It's conveying the strength of what you feel about the issue, because then people can tap into the authentic nature of what you're saying.
Of course, but it's having the confidence that what you are saying will mean something to people, because I know what I want to get across. I just hope that what I do get across is valuable to other people. But going back to Mervyn's point about the radio, bearing in mind that our organisation, the Elders Council, is made up of we have around about 1,300 members, and you know, very few are in the 50 to 65 variety. The rest are, the majority, the main majority is from 65 upwards, to a 99-year-old that I was talking to the other day, that we have also had to use the conventional methods of telephoning people during this time, because we know that we can't catch everybody with online communications, and we know it could be quite some while before we are able to do that. So we do have to balance what we're doing and try and make things as clear as possible. Now, Barbara mentioned before that not everybody wants to go online, even if we gave them the opportunity to. I have members of my own family who aren't interested. It's not always a case of cost, but with some people, cost is quite important as well. So there are many things to take into consideration, but we do the best that we can to reach as many people as we can. And this is where radio is very, very important to do that, because the majority of people will have access to a radio and will be able to tune into different radio programs. Some people have their favorites, some people are willing to listen to different things and be challenged by different things. It's how we approach that, how we put it across to people, how we encourage people to do that.
Can I just come in? Can I just pick up on Anne's point and in part Gerry's point? One of the things that I've been interested in since being involved with East London Radio and yourselves is talk shows, radio talk shows. I'm a great fan and always have been a fan, even in my teens, around talk radio. And I've been interested in phone-ins. So you get sort of LBC that's dominated by phone-ins. And thinking about the sorts of people that ring in. So I've been thinking around how can we develop a very similar approach as part of our toolkit, if you like, where people can phone in and talk about whatever they want to talk about, either themed or not themed. Yeah. But where we can be, they are phoning into, if you like, an age-focused program. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes.
And I think democratizing voices of older people is not just about democratizing the voices of older activists like ourselves. Yeah. You know, who wants to activate me? Very few people, including the management indoors. So what I would be saying is that often we judge success. How do we measure success in using radio or audio in increasing and enabling and democratizing voices of older people in civic and civil engagement? Yeah. How would we measure success? And one point I would make, I've said this in Newcastle, and I say it to Ian, our wonderful editor and producer of Age Beats, is it's not about the listening numbers, because often we judge success through radio on the numbers of people that tune in. And I get that. But what we're about is we're changing narratives and mindsets about growing older, age issues, challenging stereotypes, confronting the horrendous ageism that's been around, certainly, and exposed more with COVID-19. So it's about saying, how do we get in front of the mic? How do we get behind the mic and design content that always challenges assumptions made about me or you as an older adult? And that's, I think, something that we need to be thinking about when we're looking at digitalisation in relation to older people.
Can I come in there? Because I think personally that LAN, the network, has made some very good steps in that direction. Yeah. I think the series of programs that LAN has put out during COVID have been really interesting. And what I've really liked about them is you've had very interesting speakers in conversation with one another. And I found that a really good learning experience, because very often when, particularly on topical issues, the way in which things play out on radio tend to be quite adversarial. They tend to be directed at tripping somebody up as a way of trying to find the truth. And I actually think we very rarely get to the truth via that way, because everybody just gets more skilled on not being tripped up. Yeah. Whereas what I found in the conversations that you've hosted online is that there've been a variety of opinions and people have been able to have a conversation. And that has enabled me to start to form my own opinions as well. And I found that incredibly helpful. And I think that's key to some of this democratizing. You know, it's not. So I think your idea of phone-ins is really interesting. But again, I think if the style of that can, in a way, if we can keep that style, which is about having a conversation, listening to other opinions, deliberating on other opinions, rather than, you know, this very, as I say, what I see as quite an adversarial way of doing things, you know, question time, all those programs, they're very, very adversarial and don't allow you to grow your own thinking. And I think that's a really important part of democratizing things, really.
Yeah, I think from a journalistic point of view, that's one of the main challenges, because it has turned into an adversarial contest. And of course, particularly when you're trying to deal with politicians or spokespeople for official organizations who may be in the spotlight because something has gone wrong or something isn't working as well as it should have been. Time is the enemy of the broadcaster and is the friend of the person being interviewed, because they're counting down the clock, they're giving the stock answers and everything else. I think there has been an effort in some shows. I would highlight, I don't hold any briefing, but someone like Evan Davis on the PM show Monday to Friday on Radio 4 likes more of a discussion, an open-ended discussion, where he's not necessarily trying to trip you up. He's trying to have, as you say, Barbara, some of those different voices, different ways of thinking about it. And of course, we have the advantage on Mixcloud as a platform that we have time. And as Mervyn has shown, you can give time to someone and let them develop their thought. Now, the trick in that is obviously you have to try and maintain a level of pace and interest so that it becomes a talk worth listening to, not just giving someone a platform for an hour and you find after 22 minutes it's beginning to peter out because they've run out of the arguments to back up what they were initially starting the conversation with.
Yes.
But I think that's very true, because people value a chance where it is a conversation, because we all grew up having conversations, and we think I would say older generations are better at listening and having those conversations. So that's what we have to try and find a way of maximizing that opportunity to give people those voices.
Yes. And giving people an opportunity to voice an opinion which they may not be totally confident about, or they're not just there to bang a drum, they may be exploring an idea. And I think that's where the sort of idea of a phone-in, which enables that, I think this, but I'm not totally sure. I just think otherwise we only hear from those of us who speak loudest.
And yeah, I think that's exactly the point. We just got a question in which really picks up on that. How do you get more people to the table, but in a deliberative manner? And I think that's something, where older people's forums play a big role, but it's also something that we talked about with the Later Life Audio and Radio Cooperative, getting older people's voices in front and behind the mic, as Mervyn said, but also getting those voices into digital spaces, which is a space in which they might not be heard on a regular basis, such as younger voices. So yeah, maybe anyone who would like to answer this question or has some thoughts.
Well, I'll just pick up on one thing, which is the case that over the last 15 years, I would say, and I've worked in about 5 or 6 different newsrooms, the age profile is reducing all the time. Now, that could be an energizing way of looking at the world, because obviously they're coming with their views and their standpoints. But sometimes it means that older people, and by older people in broadcasting, I'm talking almost from your mid-40s onward, to be classified as part of an ancient regime. So even within the professional newsrooms preparing these, you now find a dominance by younger people and older people being generally phased out. And that does have an impact in terms of the type of stories which are highlighted and the type of issues which are talked about. And I think a good editor in charge of a newsroom would be conscious of the fact that he or she, increasingly, it is she, I'm glad to say, would have to have a diversity of voices, not only on air, but also those people behind the camera producing it. And also picking up on the point which Anne said, which I think is something that we have to be very conscious of as well. We're dealing with a range of people who are classified as old. The Elders Council starts at a base of 50. Some people might think that's quite a young base to start at, but be that as it may, then there are people over 65 and into the 70s and the 80s who may not want to do all that much digital engagement, or may really want to learn about it. But also we mustn't forget the importance of that human connection. And I found during the course of this that sometimes if I want a really decent conversation with someone, I just phone them. You know,
Yeah.
what's wrong with picking up the phone, guys? Yes. Just having that nice conversation, because sometimes this can still feel a little bit artificial. Yeah. And I think, as Anne said, it's important to remember that there are people who may not want to fully engage. So we have to help them to go as far as they want to go, while recognizing that all of us, it's an opportunity to keep learning, because this is what it's about, isn't it? As life goes on, you don't stop learning. Hopefully you want to maintain that curiosity to learn something again.
Yeah.
And already that type of content creation, I think that's something very innovative in itself. Having older people as creators of content, already that is something that changes the narrative and shows that we can do things differently.
Yes. Yeah.
I think another point I would add, and I certainly agree with both Gerry, Barbara and Anne, but in terms of LARC, which I need to point out will be soon rebranded LARC, and I'm now going to emphasise why that is, that the Later Life Audio and Radio Network will now become the Later Life Audio and Radio Cooperative. Now, the reason we've looked at a cooperative is simply to underline that all those people engaged with the network are equal, whatever their age, whether they're over 50 or under 50, or thank God, even under 8, that they are equal in terms of their voices. Also, the people producing the shows or the program content, they own the network, they control the network, and they benefit from the network, both as producers and members. So that's why we decided that we'd like to be to develop the network as a cooperative rather than a charity, because you then get the link with who benefits. In the network, everyone benefits. Everyone's in control. It also picks up on the point in relation to the style of that we want to develop. And that is not adversarial. I think Barbara's absolutely spot on. It's more about conversations. It's about encouraging, but it's also about how do we reach people, older adults who never get an opportunity or never thought of an opportunity to engage with on the radio. I think that's why we're looking at this.
Yeah.
So we're a co-op. We are more than carrots and coffins.
Yeah, keep your eyes open. I think we're probably going to announce that soon on Twitter as well. So
Good.
It's very exciting.
I like LARC. It's like, well, we're all having a LARC here, so you can all come and join in. Yeah. I think that's very good.
and I must say this, Gerry, I did pick up your point about these programs that go on forever. You've obviously, and they burn out after 25 minutes. You've obviously been listening to Age Speaks, which is why we introduce 3 bits of music that each guest chooses, just to break it up.
Yeah, very good.
I'm only teasing you.
I've just asked into the chat if there's any more questions from the people who are listening in. If so, you can just drop them in the chat and we'll try and answer them. And if not, we can also probably come to an end soon. I think as a last question, I really want to kind of maybe summarize the discussion is how can we as people who work with technology, researchers, how can we promote older people's contributions in digital spaces, and how do we work together with communities to achieve that?
Is that to the panel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Barbara,
That's my own question. I don't think we've had any other questions.
I think one of the things that's absolutely key for me, and it's something that I personally have found in working with you and with some of your colleagues at Open Lab, is actually you've got to key into our motivation. I personally have zero interest in lots of ways in the technology itself. You know, it doesn't excite me, all the wonderful things it can do. What it does excite me is it's a means to an end. Yeah. So if you can help me understand how to get the most out of the technology to do what I'm trying to do, then I can get excited about it, and then I can engage. And it's really quite hard, because that takes a bit of building a relationship and building an understanding before we get onto the what, if you like, before we get onto the how we're going to do something or what we're going to do. It's actually what's motivating me to want to do this and to use technologies, different technologies, as a way of doing it.
I think that's an excellent point, Barbara, because you're looking at it, and I'm not technologically, because I was on the editorial side, but it's a facilitating tool, isn't it? And the motivation is, what do we want to use it for? What is our motivation? What are we trying to do with the people we are trying to reach and the community that we're already involved in? So, you know, dig deep into the motivation and then see what kind of additional skills we need to make it the most effective way of communicating that we can.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
I have a slightly different ask, and bearing in mind that the people taking part in this and listening to this will not all be older people. So we recognise that. I think what makes me passionate about what we want to do is I would love to encourage younger people. So, for example, if I ask the question of you, Arlind, and Daniel, and the other younger members that I know of taking part, have you, with what we are discussing, have you sort of recognised that you too will be old one of these days, and you too will be facing some of these issues? So has the current situation, you know, we've had 3 months to reflect on everything that's happened recently. Has the current situation made you think, well, these are things that I want to continue to being involved in, and perhaps I can encourage other people to be involved in, and think about it at an earlier age? So think about things like pensions and, you know, the boring things, but which are quite important when you retire. Yeah. And get to that point where you think, oh, now I've got no money, or now I have no house, or now I have no care, or now I have nothing. So it's reflecting on what could happen and doing something about it at a younger age.
Yeah, and I think we can all take that question with us after the panel and really, yeah, reflect on it. But I think also what you just said is that intergenerational aspect, right? We're all in a weird situation at the minute, and how do we experience this, but also how can we strengthen intergenerational cohesion? How can we work together to change the world, and what makes intergenerational work so special? I think that's a very personal, very personal view. We actually just had another question from Alex, and he says, I'm interested in this focus on radio and microphones. In HCI, we would see these as offering particular affordances for finding and offering a voice. But what about other media and technology? Each comes with its ways of giving voice. How do you create the conditions for other platforms? And I think that probably refers to, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but I think that we are very interested in radio because it offers that kind of digital but also non-digital engagement. You can engage with very low or no tech ways, but you can also skill yourself up in terms of digitalizing content, creating online content. So I think that's what we as a network find a really interesting and really powerful way about radio in particular. But maybe I also pass this question on to the panel. What about other media and other technology? How can we create similar conditions for other platforms?
I'd like to know a little bit more of what kind of alternatives that Alex had in his or her mind. In terms of, because there are other platforms, but as you've explained pretty well there in terms of why radio and audio felt was a way of building engagement and everything else. But just to go back to one other point, when Anne was very astute in putting the question back to you and your generation in terms of what are you learning from this engagement with older people. But I think there's definitely a conversation to be had about the economic costs as well as the health and physical costs of COVID. And there's a lot of emphasis now on who will pay ultimately. Is it your generation in their 20s who's going to have to pick up all the tabs? And that leads us into a conversation in Britain about the nature of the triple lock on the pensions. That's for another day. But already you can see there beginning to be warrior ships circling around one another saying, hey, we can't pick up the whole bill for this because you guys and girls, you know, in your 60s, 70s, you were the golden generation, or you had many advantages which are no longer available to us in our 20s and our 30s. And as I say, that is something which I think is going to become part of the political debate, not only in the UK, but I suspect in many countries in the coming months and years, as the economic costs, you know, are more defined.
And I take that, and I think it's important, given that we've gone down this road in the last sort of 5 minutes or so, that all methods of engagement, of dialogue, of deliberation, which is based on mutual respect of both intergenerations and intra-generations, underpins those conversations. And it's not just, COVID has put into stark reality the issue of ageism and ageist thinking, but that way predates COVID. What COVID did was to strip away some of the veneer around ageism. But ageism exists, it's endemic, particularly in relation to older adults in the context of, if you like, the health and social care prism. That compassionate ageism is doing as much damage to the empowerment and engagement of older adults than almost anywhere else. So I think those discussions in any vehicle, through any medium, are worth having. And that's what I would be advocating.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing, to get a widespread message across. Yeah. I can ask Alex also to unmute if you would like to specify what you mean with the different platforms and these conditions. So I give you an opportunity now.
Arlind, thank you, and thank you to the panel. It's been a real inspiration to hear you. And in a way, I don't want to take away from Anne's provocation to us, which is to think about what it is to be older than 50, which I am. I think those issues of who comes to the table and who has a voice is so important for us. And as you know, in the Open Lab in particular, trying to give voices to the many is what motivates many of us in the field of HCI. And I suppose, I mean, I really love radio, and I think it's such a powerful medium that has, in a way, found a new life. I think many of us are listening to radio in a way that we probably didn't do in the past. But I also think there's this heterogeneity of platforms that each has its own qualities and its own dimensions. And, you know, I think, you know, we may laugh at platforms like TikTok, and certainly I've been looking at the content on it recently for my own session on Thursday, and the quality of the materials is pretty appalling. But at the same time, it does a certain kind of work and speaks to a certain kind of audience. To be constrained to a minute-long video already enforces us, and it's like the soapbox in Hyde Park Corner. It already does a certain kind of work of how you can speak to other people. And so I suppose my own work is interested in how do we start to expand the kind of platforms that we might make available to all communities, whether they be older people or BAME communities or whatever it might be. And already the kinds of things I've been hearing from the panel members has helped me think, you know, what other kinds of qualities do we need? So obviously radio is a broadcast platform, but the idea of a phone-in starts to democratize that process. How do you start to invite other members from the community to participate? And so I think as platforms, we should be continually trying to think, how do you start to draw people in, even if we're thinking about broadcasts, for example.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Arlind, that wasn't really a question, but I think it's just a really stimulating conversation. So
but it's a very good point, actually, because I'm not on TikTok, but I read about TikTok, and you see these memes going out and everything else. And suddenly in the space of a year, for a certain generation, it would seem, it's become a really cool way to communicate, even in that compressed version, because that's what they like. Something short, snappy, clever, and it takes your attention. So and as you say, Alex, we shouldn't be closing our eyes or ears to any other opportunities to use other platforms. But I think we've got to establish a certain credibility and a base, taking very much into account Mervyn's point about it's not about numbers, it's about what you're doing with the audio that you're producing. But we need to establish that base and then reach out further. I think they can run parallel, but as I say, we've got to make sure we have a solid product, for want of a better word, or program, before we necessarily start looking at other avenues to explore, digital avenues even to explore.
But I think this is also a really good point that Alex made for us to think in the future how we connect different platforms together. And I know that members of the network have already done that. So Sonder Radio, they've kind of tried to connect sort of buddy telephone. I don't remember what it's called right now.
Buddy telephone, they do,
or the buddy line, where they kind of take telephone conversations, put them on a platform, transforming them into radio. And I think this also leads to another question we just had, which says, connected to the radio voice question, does the panel see Mixcloud or similar service as radio in the traditional sense? Which maybe I can just say that even though we operate a Mixcloud as the network, which we want to function as a hub for all great talk-based content that's created by older people, all of our members also broadcast on either digital stations or FM stations. But I actually also want to pass this question on. Do you see Mixcloud as radio in the traditional sense? Mervyn, do you have anything?
No, I mean, I'd never heard of Mixcloud until I started Age Speaks. I thought it was a weather front. So, you know, I mean, I don't really understand it. I mean, I don't understand. I didn't know what a mix test was. For me, providing people can access it and people can listen, that's fine by me, whether it's Mixcloud or whatever. But I do take Alex's challenge to us, and that is really, we need to be using the whole scope of media, social media, whatever, but also journalism. I think documentaries, not just talk-based, but I think radio documentaries that explore aging issues is a way forward as well. So I'm struggling to answer your point, because I didn't know what a Mixcloud was until very recently.
I mean, I would say, you know, Mixcloud, obviously, because you have to get to it online, don't you? So it's not like turning on the radio. So it isn't quite the same. Its output, if you like, is almost the same and is very similar, but its mechanism of getting to it isn't, you know, and we can't pretend it is.
I think the question was just specified, actually. Do the listeners feel it is traditional radio? Which I don't personally. But
if you take, for example, and Barbara, you know, is spot on in saying it's just a platform, it's the means by getting the content out there. But if you look at what BBC has done with BBC Sounds, that has become a huge platform.
Yeah.
There are those who've criticised BBC for sort of downgrading the traditional integrity, if you like, of Radio 4 was there as a special product in its own right. And then if you want classical music, go to Radio 3. If you're a certain age, go to Radio 2. And if you really like young music, go to Radio 1 or Radio 1 Extra and all the rest of it. But what the BBC is, they've created their own version of Mixcloud, with having the huge advantage of the BBC brand, where they put all of their, and sometimes podcasts now just made for BBC Sounds. It won't be on Radio 4. It won't be on Radio 1. It's just for BBC Sound. And we're going to, you know, really plug this hard because we think this is the way people want to listen to audio content, that it's accessible and it's easy to get to. And it covers a range of topics, formats, musics, ideas. And that's the BBC, you know, I personally have found it a great tool to have. And I think they've done a fantastic job. But as I say, there was a lot of criticism saying, oh, you're not really spending as much of nurturing Radio 4, you know, as you should be. No, it's just in a different way of doing it.
Yes. And in a way, the way I see what you've done, what's happened with LAN is actually it's created a freedom to create very, very good listening content, you know. It just, it's broken a mold in some ways, I think, for me, in terms of its output. And if radio is about listening, it's fantastic stuff to listen to. So, you know, similarly, the East London radio, where, you know, it's just very good listening. So, you know, if that's a definition of radio, then I think it's doing a great job.
I leave it with this because I'm mindful of time and that we should be wrapping up now. And I think that's also a fantastic way to end this session. We're going to upload this on our LARN network Mixcloud. So if you want to listen again, just tune in there. You can also DM us questions on our Twitter, which is @LARN_network. If you want to continue the conversation, we'd be happy to do that. And I want to thank everyone who was on the panel, and Barbara, Mervyn, and Gerry. And thank you very much for coming on and talking about our project. And oh yeah, Daniel just said email larnnetwork@gmail.com. So you have all the contact details to catch us. And yeah, thank you to the panelists for coming on and talking about your experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.